Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold, and this week I'm joined by special guest Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. For the full show, this isn't your first time on the show, but it is your first time as a co-host. Chris Brown, thank you for joining me this week.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to give this a try.
All right, so week in review for the Tigers. This team just turned in a 5-2 record this week, 2-1 versus the Chicago White Sox at Rate Field, 3-1 versus the Minnesota Twins at Target Field, 3 of 5 wins by 1 run. So what was a 5-2 week could have easily been a 2-5 week had the Tigers lost those 1-run games, but the Tigers are one of the best teams in baseball in 1-run games at 19-8. But here were those 3 1-run games this week. Monday, it was a 2-1 win versus the White Sox. He had a clutch home run by Spencer Torkelson in the top of the 9th inning. Wednesday, it was a 1-0 win versus the White Sox. Troy Melton went 5 scoreless innings on 56 pitches. He was incredibly efficient. Juancio Perez had the sacrifice fly for the lone run. And we'll talk about Troy Melton more later in the show. But then on Thursday, it was a 4-3 win against the Twins. Tarik Skubal gave up 3 runs in the first inning, and he pitched 7 innings, but he did not look like his usual self, especially early on. But the Tigers rallied. Eventually, they won in the 11th inning. And no, I don't have any clue why Twins manager Rocco Baldelli called for Austin Martin, the Twins' best hitter against left-handers, to bunt with 1 out and a runner on third against left-handed reliever Tyler Holton in the bottom of the 10th inning. Remember, Austin Martin led off against Tarik Skubal, a lefty. So then you get to the 10th inning, you got a runner on third, only 1 out, and Austin Martin is trying to drop down bunts against Tyler Holton. That decision completely backfired, and the Tigers forced the 11th inning, and they ended up winning on Gleyber Torres' sacrifice fly after a wild pitch. Also, shout out to Rafael Montero in that game. He's been one of the worst relievers in the big leagues for the past 3 years, but he got the final 4 outs in that game. And the Royce Lewis strikeout to end the game was just perfect. It was 4 splitters down and in, 2 fastballs up, 1 slider down and away to get the strikeout. And look, I don't think Rafael Montero is going to be able to continue commanding his pitches like that because he hasn't been able to do it for 3 years. But if he does, watch out because the swing and miss is real. So those were the 3 1-run wins. Spencer Torkelson, Troy Melton, and Rocco Baldelli to thank for those wins in the past week. Chris, what did you think about the past week in baseball for the Tigers, especially with those 3 1-run wins?
Yeah, you're never going to be upset with taking 5 out of 7 on the road. I know Tigers fans probably, want to get greedy and get them all, especially against 2 of the worst teams in baseball. But there wasn't there's an element of the gritty Tigers back. It's not the same as last year. Now, last year it was like they were playing fundamental and getting everything that they could out of the games. But this time, they're finding ways to win, which is better than finding ways to lose. I'll say that. But it was also, some of the games that you didn't mention where they, there was a lot of run scoring, or they would take a lead and then suddenly they would give it right back. You're like, oh, it's close. So yeah, they're still not playing to the level that they were playing earlier in the year. But again, you take the wins and you forget about it and you move on.
Where are you at on Tarik Skubal too, by the way? Because if you look at his last 3 starts, and I'm not trying to nitpick Tarik Skubal because I do think that he is the greatest pitcher in the world, but we do have to talk about where he's at because he even said after his most recent start, maybe he's battling some things physically, maybe mentally a little bit, like it's the grind of the season. We're in the middle of August, like it is the dog days of summer as they call it. But this is a guy who, yes, he went out and threw 7 innings and he only gave up 3 runs, but 2 walks, 3 strikeouts. And then you go back and you look at his start before that against the Los Angeles Angels, and it was 4 2/3 innings, 4 runs, 2 walks again. That time he had 6 strikeouts, but the walks have been uncharacteristic. And you go back and you look at his last 4 starts, 3 walks, 0 walks, 2 walks, 2 walks. That is not Tarik Skubal, the guy that we've been accustomed to seeing for most of this season. Are you worried at all, or are you going to chalk it up to, hey, it's the middle of August. This guy's going to lock it in once we get to late September and get ready for the postseason run?
Yeah, that was my initial thought. It's dog days stuff. He's human. Despite
it's easy to forget, isn't it?
Yeah, like the last year and a half. But I think on top of being one of the most talented pitchers in the world, he's a really hard worker, and he's the guy who's going to figure it out if there is an issue, I think. Now, hopefully, it's not a physical issue that's causing him some problems there, but I'm sure he'll, do his bullpen and figure out this is just slightly off. And he's also a guy who tends to rise to the occasion, if that makes sense. We've seen him at times before, really go out there and get double-digit strikeouts against like a tough opponent, or
he meets the moment.
Yeah,
every
this
time.
This time last year was the Little League game, right? And he went out there and took on the Yankees and had a good outing. It wasn't an elite outing for him, but he did shut down Judge and Soto and all those guys. So yeah, I'm expecting him to pick it back up soon, and he'll be that same sort of dominant ace that we're expecting to see.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about Tarik Skubal at all. And you know what? 3 runs, 7 innings, I'll take that all day, every day. So MLB standings, we'll take an updated look at how things are going. After going 5-2 this week, the Tigers now have a 73-53 record, quietly winning 13 of their last 20 games. Last week, we discussed our panic meter. I was at a medium. Now I'm somewhere between low and medium because the lead in the American League Central is 8.5 games over the Cleveland Guardians and 9 games over the Kansas City Royals. A little over a week ago, that lead was all the way down to 5 games. So there was some reason to be concerned then, especially with 6 games against the Guardians in the final 2 weeks of the season once we get into September. But the good news is the Tigers have pulled away again. And not only have the Tigers started winning more games, but the Guardians have started to struggle, which was to be expected. I mentioned that on last week's episode. I said I didn't think the Tigers were going to play any worse than 500 the rest of the way. But at the same time, I didn't think the Guardians would be able to continue winning 70% of their games. And during the past week, that's proven to be true. The Tigers had a 5-2 week. The Guardians had a 2-4 record.
Yeah. And you look at the stats and the Guardians have a below average offense, one of the bottom 5 offenses in baseball. I think, they lost their closer to a gambling scandal. They have a negative run differential, right? Like I think Tigers fans are gotten a little spooked by Cleveland just because, last year. But yeah, it's not a complete team by any means. And for them to keep winning, they're going to need a lot of magic. And it didn't happen. They lost to a pretty bad Braves team, at least a Braves team that's played well below its talent level all year long. And yeah, it's a bummer that the Tigers lost on Sunday, but every other team, unless you're worried about the Royals coming back, the Royals gained a game, but the Astros lost, the Blue Jays lost, the Guardians lost. It was, no harm, no foul. You get a half game closer on your magic number. So yeah, my concern now for the division is very low. I think that they're going to probably run away with it still. So now it's kind of about, getting everything right for the playoffs.
Well, you mentioned the Blue Jays and the Astros. We're going to stay locked into the postseason picture with 36 games remaining in the regular season for the Tigers. Remember, the Tigers need to be one of the top 2 division winners to advance directly to the best of 5 AL division series, skipping the best of 3 wildcard series. Right now, the Tigers are one of those 2 teams. The AL East leading Toronto Blue Jays have a half-game lead over the AL Central leading Tigers, with both teams now lined up for a bye to the ALDS. The Tigers, though, have a 3-game lead on the AL West leading Houston Astros, and that 3-game lead is the difference between the Tigers playing in the best of 3 wildcard series and the best of 5 ALDS to start the postseason. I think it's of the utmost importance for the Tigers to get a bye to the ALDS because you can only use Tarik Skubal once in a wildcard series. And even if he's dominant and you win game 1 in a wildcard series, the other 2 games are a toss-up. A bye to the ALDS is best for the Tigers, especially since they have the best pitcher in the world. Right now, the Tigers are lined up to get that bye to the ALDS, but for it to stay that way, they'll have to fend off the Houston Astros, and the Astros are coming to town for a 3-game series at Comerica Park beginning Monday. So this is a really important series coming up, at least for the playoff picture. Right now, the Tigers are lined up to play the winner of the wild card series between the Astros and the Yankees, while the Blue Jays are lined up to play the winner of the wild card series between the Mariners and the Red Sox. But we still have more than 30 games left in the regular season, so a lot can happen here.
Yeah, I did. Astro series, I'm looking for it to be a little bit like the Cubs series from a couple of months back when the Tigers and the Cubs were the 2 best teams in baseball. And, there was an electric atmosphere. Now, I think that was a weekend series, so, you can't expect too much, but it's still the summer. School hasn't started yet. People can get out there. And, the Astros, I don't know if we've talked about them a ton, but just looking at them, they've had so many injuries this year and they just keep going. They just lost Josh Hader, but I don't know. It seems like nothing has slowed them down. So that's a tough team and the Tigers are going to have to prove their mettle against them.
All right, let's get into the big 2. Question 1 of the big 2, and it's a big one. Should the Tigers promote Kevin McGonigle in 2025? First off, I don't think Kevin McGonigle to Detroit is going to happen in 2025. And we can get into the reasons why I don't think it's going to happen. But before we do, I want to push back on that a little bit. Again, I don't think it's what's going to happen, but maybe it's what needs to happen. Kevin McGonigle, the number 1 prospect in baseball, he is hitting .286 with 6 home runs, 18 walks, and 12 strikeouts over 26 games in Double-A Erie with a .972 OPS. He has had more walks than strikeouts at every level of his minor league career, from the Florida Complex League to Low A Lakeland to High West Michigan to Double A Erie. The Tigers promoted McGonigle to Double A Erie on July 7th, so he's been there for about 6 weeks, and the level doesn't seem to be a challenge for him. That's my biggest reason for why the Tigers maybe need to call him up right now, because the Double A level, which is the level we like to use to really evaluate hitters because the pitching gets significantly better. The stuff at the Double A level is a lot different than the stuff at the High A level. The Double A level isn't a challenge for Kevin McGonigle, and that's not the case for some other top prospects. For example, Tharon Lorenzo, whom the Tigers acquired from the Dodgers in the Jack Flaherty trade. He's hitting .219 with a .692 OPS in Double A Erie. So my point is that it's already clear Kevin McGonigle needs to be challenged. So either move him up to AAA Toledo or promote him to the Tigers for his MLB debut. That's why I think the door should be open for a September call-up, or maybe even a call-up before then with the Tigers. But Chris, you are the prospects expert. You are part of Tigers Minor League Report. You watch all of these at-bats. You've seen Kevin McGonigle all the way through. Is it crazy to think, call the kid up?
I don't think it's crazy, and it's really fun to think about, right? Like that would, we've been watching him do these things at the minor league level for a couple of years, and it would just be fun to get him up. But I do think it feels like a simple question to answer, but it's a lot more complex. Like the more I think about it, and I think when you're talking about calling somebody up like this, and we saw the Tigers do it with Jackson Jobe last year, right? In that one, it's different for a pitcher. It just is, it's stuff, and you're not. In that case, they took him as a starter and moved him to a reliever so they could kind of manage things. When you're a position player, if they're going to bring you up, you got to play every day. I would think otherwise it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's kind of what I look at is like, does this benefit the team and does it benefit the player? And I'm not 100% sure it does either in this situation. And McGonigle is an amazing talent. I've been following and covering the minor leagues since, the mid-aughts. And in that time, I've seen like a handful of what you would call elite minor league hitters, right? It goes back to Cameron Maybin and then Nick Castellanos, then Riley Green and Colt Keith, and now McGonigle and Clark are in that conversation. McGonigle is the best of them by far in terms of just a total package, in terms of bat to ball skills, swing decisions, plate discipline, and power. He's got more power than I think a lot of people realize. Even still, he's not like Juan Soto and Bryce Harper and one of these guys who comes up and is immediately an above average big league hitter. I think he's closer to those other Tigers that I was talking about. And all those guys struggled to a certain extent when they first got to the big leagues. It was like, you can look at it and they all put up a WRC plus somewhere in like the mid 90s, which is fine. It would probably be a slight upgrade over what the Tigers are doing right now with McKinstry and Sweeney and Baez, maybe a large upgrade. If we're being honest. But I think the question with him is the defense. And he's fine. I think he's got everything he needs to be an average big league shortstop, but he just needs reps. And every time he goes up a level, at least, it's happened twice now. So maybe it's just a coincidence, but he makes a handful of errors in the first few games. It's almost like he's just expecting the game to speed up on him. And so he speeds up on himself and he makes kind of mental mistakes or plays the wrong hop. He did it today on Sunday. He was kind of a do or die play in a double play, and he tried to go for the short hop, and the ball got past him instead of just laying back and getting one out. So, like I said, he's got the tools to play shortstop, and he's got the makeup. From everything I've heard and I've talked to him, he's got like 80 makeup. This is a legit kid who's going to get every ounce of his ability. I just think he needs more reps, and I don't know if you want him playing shortstop on a regular basis, particularly in the playoffs. Like I said, he's not going to be your best defensive shortstop right away. And that may be a reason to keep him down. I would have no problem with them moving up to Toledo, though, if you want to give him a little bit more of a challenge. But I don't think Toledo's going to be much of a challenge there. AAA is going to be much of a challenge for him offensively either. It's just about getting those defensive reps, I think.
Yeah, the only thing I can think about when it comes to AAA versus AA is maybe the game planning is a little bit better from a pitching standpoint, where maybe the stuff isn't as good, but the game planning is going to be better in the way in which catchers are calling games and trying to pick you apart as a hitter. Maybe those catchers, again, for example, the Tigers have Tharon Lorenzo in AA and Tomas Nido in AAA. Who do I trust to call a better game? It's Tomas Nido. He's been doing it for a long time, including at the big league level. So maybe the way that pitchers attack Kevin McGonigle gets a little bit more challenging for him at the AAA level. But from a stuff standpoint, like I think he's shown that he can pretty much handle anything in the batter's box. And I like that you mentioned Jackson Jobe. The timeline isn't much different than Jackson Jobe. Remember, the Tigers promoted Jackson Jobe in late September last season. They moved him to the bullpen. But I do think, to your point, like it's completely different in that one is a hitter and one is a pitcher. And if you're a pitcher, that part is like the part of the sport that you can control. Like when you're a pitcher and you're on the mound, like you get to choose what shapes you're throwing. When you're a hitter, you do not get to choose what shapes you're seeing when you're in the batter's box. Additionally, as a pitcher, you can move from the rotation to the bullpen, and you can be used specifically when the manager wants to use you, and he can pick his spots for you. Whereas if you're a hitter, you're going to get at-bats every day. And that's the reactionary part of the sport. Like pitching is proactive, hitting is reactionary. And there's a huge difference in the roles of Jackson Jobe and Kevin McGonigle, even though the timeline isn't that much different. Like it's August 18th. And at this time last year, Jackson Jobe was in Double-A Erie, and the Tigers promoted him to Triple-A Toledo on September 8th. He made 2 starts for the Mud Hens. And then the Tigers promoted him September 24th for his MLB debut. And right now, Kevin McGonigle is at Double-A Erie. So what's to say that he's not in the big leagues by the end of September, gearing up for a postseason run? The Tigers have precedent of moving their top prospects extremely fast to contribute in the postseason. We've seen it on the pitching side. We haven't seen it on the hitting side, but to some of the points you made, where I get hung up on McGonigle to Detroit in 2025, whether it's late August, early September, whatever, is there's going to be an adjustment period for hitters going to the big league level. So let's say the Tigers promote McGonigle for his MLB debut on September 1st, let's just say, right? September 1st happens, and let's say that it's Alex Cobb who joins as the pitcher and Kevin McGonigle who joins as the hitter. Your rosters have expanded by 2. You've now got 14 position players, 14 pitchers, and let's say that Kevin McGonigle is your extra position player. That will be 24 games in the regular season remaining in September. So if he gets 4 plate appearances in every game, that's 96 plate appearances. And in all reality, he probably doesn't play in every single game, but you're probably looking at 85 to 90 plate appearances from September 1st to September 28th in the regular season. That's not a lot of plate appearances. And he could easily struggle through an adjustment period and be hitting under the Mendoza line in those first 24 games in the big leagues. And then you got to throw him into the postseason competition. Like, to your point, remember how Spencer Torkelson struggled. Remember how Riley Green struggled. Remember how Colt Keith struggled. Like, those examples are probably the biggest reasons for just keeping Kevin McGonigle in the minor leagues for the rest of the 2025 season, and then just putting him on the opening day roster for the 2026 season. Like, it's really easy to kill a kid's confidence, especially when it's only 90 plate appearances. And if he just so happens to struggle, then he gets thrown into the fire in the postseason. I don't know how I feel about him taking postseason at-bats if he's, struggling through an adjustment period. Like that's not really the best spot for him. You'd like to see him have a longer period of time to be able to make that adjustment and get locked in. But if the Tigers think he's good enough, then let's do it. And if we're going to do it, then let's get him up here before September 1st so he can settle in as much as possible. I certainly think it would be a lot of fun. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the one other, way you would do it is if you've already decided that he's your opening day starter at shortstop, second base, third base next year. In which case, if you've decided that already, and you probably should because he's good, then just call him up and play him. Start playing him every day. Or you could do what you did. People might not remember this, but they did the same sort of thing with Nick Castellanos back in 2013. He had been through a full season in AAA though, and they called him up right before September and they gave him 20 plate appearances, and then he was the starter the next year. So it was just like a cup of coffee.
Right. And that's the thought that I have is if you are if he's going to be your opening day starter in 2026, and if you're even thinking about calling him up when rosters expand on September 1st, then just call him up now.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But we do have some precedent here around the league with a guy like Jackson Merrill from the San Diego Padres, right? He's drafted 27th overall in 2021 by Tigers scouting director Mark Connor. And Mark Connor, after joining the Tigers, drafted Kevin McGonigle 37th overall in 2023. Now, in Jackson Merrill's case, he had not played above the Double-A level, playing just 46 games at Double-A, but the Padres then put him on the 2024 opening day roster, and he hit 292.
At a different position.
Right, at a different position, definitely. But
I just mean for him, he had been playing shortstop, and they're like, how about outfield now? And then he made the team.
That's a good point. And what did he do? He hit 292 with an 826 OPS that season, making the All-Star game and finishing runner-up to Paul Skeens in National League Rookie of the Year. And he hadn't played more than 46 games at the Double-A level, and he didn't play at all at Triple-A. So when you take that and you say, okay, let's compare Jackson Merrill and Kevin McGonigle at the Double-A level. Jackson Merrill hit 273 with 5 home runs, 18 walks, 25 strikeouts, and a 782 OPS in 46 games. Kevin McGonigle is hitting 286 with 6 home runs, 18 walks, 12 strikeouts, and a 972 OPS in 26 games. So Kevin McGonigle is better than Jackson Merrill in batting average, home runs, walks, strikeouts, and OPS at the Double-A level. So if Jackson Merrill could jump straight to the big leagues, why can't Kevin McGonigle? Now, the one argument, as you brought up earlier, would be the defense. Jackson Merrill as an above average center fielder, and Kevin McGonigle with some question marks at shortstop. And his defense, average to below average. To your point, needs some reps. Maybe he eventually needs to move to second base or third base. Like, that's one thing that might be different about Kevin McGonigle and Jackson Merrill. But I get back to my original point. What challenge does Kevin McGonigle need right now? Offensively, it seems like the big leagues is the only answer, because Double-A looks like easy mode for the number one prospect in baseball.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do you want to talk about that? Something strange happened on Saturday night. He struck out, which is something he hadn't done in the previous 8 games. He went 8 games without striking out. It's so just good. Remarkable back-to-bat ball skills. Remarkable, he's got the ideal launch angle. I don't like to put comparisons on players, but it's fun. People like to hear it. So like a 99th percentile outcome for Kevin McGonigle is Jose Ramirez. Like this guy who's hitting 30 bombs a year in batting close to 300, even though he's smaller. It's just the ceiling sky high there. But the one other point I guess I'll make, and we can probably put this one to rest, is that, you talk about Jackson Merrill. I talked about Nick Castellanos. The GMs who made those decisions, that was Dave Dombrowski and AJ Preller. They're a little bit more aggressive, I would say, than Scott Harris. I think calling up Jackson Jobe last year was probably the most aggressive thing we've seen Scott Harris do. So there is some history there with him doing it, but I'd be surprised. It would be a welcome surprise, but I don't think it's going to happen.
That's a great point. Question 2 of the big 2. The Tigers are trying to maximize their pitching staff with a focus on each series. What are they doing, and what should we expect? So the Tigers have a below average bullpen, and if you need proof of that, the Tigers bullpen ranks 18th in MLB with a 4.06 ERA for the entire 2025 season. But since May 16th, the Tigers bullpen ranks 26th in MLB with a 4.64 ERA. So it's been a bottom 5 bullpen for literally 3 months. Again, the Tigers have one of the 5 worst bullpens over the past 3 months, only better than the Yankees, Twins, Nationals, and Rockies. Some would say the Tigers have a bad bullpen. I choose to say the Tigers have a below average bullpen. Before we get into what they're doing with their bullpen though, Chris, what are some of your thoughts on the bullpen as we sit here today? Obviously the trade deadline happened and the Tigers went out and they got Kyle Finnegan. They got Rafael Montero. They got an injured Paul Sewald. What are your thoughts on where we're at right now?
Yeah, it's tough. Early in the year, it seemed like they had the 8th and 9th inning kind of locked down with Canely and Vest. And Vest he'd gone through some struggles, but he's still largely, I think, pretty good. Canely has fallen apart, and it's been a bummer to see there. And to a certain extent, you understand it. He kind of was using a trick pitch, as Jim Price would say back in the day, with the changeup. He's almost like a knuckleballer, really. But I was not terribly thrilled with Kyle Finnegan as an acquisition, but he's been really good so far. They tweaked his pitch mix a little bit. We'll see how teams start to adjust to him in the coming weeks or so. But yeah, it really does feel like they've got an awful lot of options, and not many of them are great, or they don't seem to have confidence in many of them. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's what this final 6 weeks of the season is going to be about, is finding the guys they can count on. But it almost feels like there are too many options, and how much can you really judge based on an outing or two?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The Tigers know they have a below average bullpen, which is why what they're doing is they're essentially turning an 8-man bullpen into a larger pool of relievers while still keeping 5 starters in the rotation. So the Tigers have 13 pitchers on the roster right now. And on September 1st, that will grow to 14 pitchers. But for now, it's 13 pitchers on a 26-man roster. And of those 13 pitchers, 8 of them are relievers, but the Tigers are making strategic roster moves to access more relievers, both to keep their arms fresh and to take advantage of matchups with a focus on winning series. We've already seen this for about a week to 10 days, and I think it's going to continue for the rest of the season. Maybe we can call this bullpen chaos, because the bullpen isn't getting any better without this strategy. And not to rip on the bullpen too much, but you've got Kyle Finnegan and Will Vest closing games, and you've got Troy Melton, who dominates right-handed hitters, by the way, as a Swiss Army knife, who's going to pitch anywhere between 1 to 4 innings, maybe 5 innings if he's really efficient like he was against the White Sox. But after those 3 guys, who are you actually confident in? So the Tigers are cycling through relievers to expand the bullpen and maximize the roster in a strategic effort to win series. And this seems to be a series-by-series approach, just to win as many series as possible, which is what AJ Hinch has preached all year. Win today's game, win as many series as possible, and then let's count up the wins at the end of the season. As for this new bullpen strategy, look no further than what the Tigers did on the 7-game road trip, calling up Sawyer Gipson-Long for 2 innings out of the bullpen in Wednesday's series finale against the White Sox, in which the Tigers won 1-0, in part thanks to Gipson-Long's 2 scoreless innings. The bullpen was gassed. The Tigers needed Sawyer Gipson-Long's pitches, so they called on him and he delivered. And then the Tigers immediately sent out Gipson-Long and called up left-handed reliever Bailey Horn for the 4-game series against the Twins. Why did they do that? Well, it's because Bailey Horn thrives against left-handed hitters, and the Twins came into that series with 6 left-handed hitters among their 13 position players. And again, Horn dominates lefties, so there's the strategy for matchup reasons. The Tigers used Horn twice in the 4-game series, and although he walked 4 batters in 3 innings, he still put up zeros on the scoreboard in both of his outings. And before Sunday's game against the Twins, the Tigers called up right-handed reliever Brennan Hanafy from AAA Toledo after he spent the minimum 15 days with the Mud Hens. He should have never been optioned in the first place, especially when the Tigers cut Luke Jackson just a few days later. That was malpractice by Scott Harris and honestly just an embarrassing mistake managing the roster. But that's besides the point. What matters here is that the Tigers brought Hanafy back because he deserves to be here. And he has been one of their best relievers this season. But also, the Tigers are about to play 3 games against the Astros, and the Astros have 9 right-handed hitters among their 13 position players. What does Brendan Hanafy do? He dominates right-handed hitters. So there's the strategy for matchup reasons. To bring back Hanafy, the Tigers sent down left-handed reliever Brant Herter because he's really struggled with his command. The Tigers want to get him synced up in throwing strikes, especially to left-handed hitters. Since June 21st, Herter has issued 16 walks and 7 hit by pitches to both righties and lefties for a total of 23 free passes in 20 innings, even though he has a 2.70 ERA in those 16 outings. So that right there, 23 free passes in his last 20 innings is why the Tigers optioned Herter to AAA Toledo. So the strategic moves this past week for the bullpen, Sawyer Gipson-Long because the Tigers needed innings, Bailey Horn because of the Twins' left-handed hitters, Brendan Hanafy because of the Astros' right-handed hitters. And let's not forget that the Tigers called up right-handed reliever Cody Hoyer about 10 days ago because of the Los Angeles Angels' right-handed hitters. So that's another strategic move for matchup reasons. And then the Tigers sent out Cody Hoyer and replaced him with Sawyer Gipson-Long, who was then replaced by Bailey Horn. So that's a detailed look at how the Tigers have been using their bullpen for the last 10 days. They've just been cycling through these relievers to expand the bullpen, maximize the roster in a strategic effort to try to win series. Cody Hoyer for the Angels, Sawyer Gipson-Long for the White Sox, Bailey Horn for the Twins. 3 bad teams, but guess what? The Tigers won all 3 of those series, and now we'll see what happens with Hanafy and the Astros. I know that was a lot to kind of digest, but there were a lot of moving parts there. Chris, what are your thoughts on how the Tigers have decided to use the bullpen? And do you think that with how poorly the bullpen has performed, especially since the middle of May, this could be a solution? Or is this just a revolving door that's really never going to find a fix?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to look at it. You know, one of the things when you focus as much on the minor leagues as we do, we've noticed in the last couple of years that basically half the Erie roster at AA has just been stuck there. It's because Scott Harris likes to have big leaguers or former big leaguers or guys who could come up and help the big leagues at Toledo. He loves to treat AAA as just a repository of close to the big league guys in other parts. And so you're seeing them cycle through all these guys. And to a certain extent, it does feel almost like desperation, or they don't have enough players they believe in. But you could also look at it sort of as them kind of wargaming or trial balloons for the playoffs, right? Because in the playoffs, you're going to form your roster based on who you're facing. And they're going to try out all these different scenarios for, okay, these are the guys who want for a right-handed heavy lineup, or these are the guys who want for a left-handed heavy lineup. And, you know, you could look at it that way. Now, of course, in the regular season, you can't set your starting rotation up, and that has a lot to do with everything. But I think you can use it to your advantage too, and just kind of figure out a little bit more about who your team is. But at a certain point, you really do want to have a bullpen of at least like 5 or 6 guys you can at least trust or have roles for. And like you said, right now, there's only a couple of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of pitching depth across the board in the organization, just in terms of arms they can turn to. But in terms of like quality depth in the big leagues, like I said, it is 3 guys that you really are able to trust right now. And then everybody else is kind of a wild card. Whereas you go look at what they did last year, it was anybody that they put on the mound was putting up a 0. Like anybody they threw out there was escaping jams. And that's just not the case this year with the bullpen, especially now as we inch closer and closer to October. So they're going to keep trying to roll with this strategy. And I get it. I think it makes sense when you talk about, you know, Cody Hoyer for the Angels and Sawyer Gipson-Long for the White Sox and, you know, Bailey Horn, you know, for the Twins, and then Brendan Hanafy for the Astros. Like those make sense from a strategic standpoint, but for a guy like Bailey Horn, like how good is he actually, right? Is that something that you really want to rely on regardless? Because again, like I said, yes, he put up zeros on the scoreboard, but he also issued a bunch of walks, and you never want free passes. So we'll see how all that plays out. We also got to look ahead to some of the other potential moves. But first, let's remind everyone what this bullpen looks like right now, because again, it's been it's been a big revolving door. 6 right-handed relievers: Kyle Finnegan, Will Vest, Brennan Hanafy, Rafael Montero, Tommy Kahnle, Troy Melton, and then 2 left-handers, Tyler Holton and Bailey Horn. What we have coming up, Tigers have 3 games against the Astros, and the Astros have 9 of 13 right-handed hitters. Then you have 3 games against the Royals with 7 of 13 left-handed hitters, including Jack Caglianone and Michael Massey, both coming back from the injured list. Then 3 games against the Athletics with 5 of 13 left-handed hitters. And then 3 more games against the Royals with 7 of 13 left-handed hitters. So you have a righty series versus the Astros, and then 3 lefty series with the Royals, Athletics, and Royals. And you might think, oh, just call Brant Herter up for the 3-game series against those lefties. But that's part of this revolving door. The Tigers can't call on him for 15 days because that's the minimum number of days a pitcher must stay in the minor leagues after being optioned. Those are the same restrictions for Cody Hoyer and Sawyer Gipson-Long. That's why the Tigers had to wait 15 days to get Brennan Hanafy back after the puzzling roster move to send him down. I'll be curious to see if the Tigers option lefty Bailey Horn for this Astros series and call up righty Chase Lee, going with 7 righties and 1 lefty in the bullpen against the Astros. That certainly would give them the best chance to win the series. And then for the upcoming series against, the lefty-loaded Royals and the Athletics, maybe that's when we see left-handed reliever Drew Sommers, who the Tigers have been really high on, and they're planning to promote him at some point this season for his MLB debut. But that's still only 2 left-handers in that bullpen, and Bailey Horn would have to stay down for 15 days if he gets sent out. So maybe the Tigers decide to keep Horn through the Astros series, even though they probably won't use him. And then maybe they add Drew Sommers to give them 3 lefties for the Royals and the Athletics. And then by the time they get through the Royals and the Athletics, guys like Cody Hoyer and Sawyer Gipson-Long and Brant Herter will be eligible to return if needed. And then the cycle can start all over again. Like, this is really creative what the Tigers are doing with their bullpen. And again, this is happening because the Tigers believe expanding the bullpen by maximizing the roster will give them the best chance of winning series. It's a bold strategy. We'll see if it pays off.
Yeah, there are a billion different moves you could make when you think about it. Yeah, that's really fascinating. As you said, you can't bring people back up for 15 days unless there's a stubbed toe or a blister or something like that. But, MLB kind of cracked down on that a few years ago. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're joined by Dan Hayes, the Minnesota Twins beat writer for The Athletic. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Dan Hayes, the Minnesota Twins beat writer for The Athletic, to the Days of Roar podcast for the first time. Dan Hayes has worked at The Athletic as the Twins beat writer for nearly 8 years, following more than 5 years covering the White Sox for NBC Sports Chicago. He is one of the best in the business, and we're lucky to have him on the show. Dan, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right, let's start with the trade deadline. In the 4 days leading up to the July 31st trade deadline, the Twins traded 11 players, including Johan Duran to the Philadelphia Phillies, Carlos Correa to the Houston Astros, Griffin Jacks to Tampa Bay Rays. Why did this fire sale happen? And what all went down at the trade deadline? Because it was crazy. It seemed like every second the Twins were trading another player.
Yeah, look, this all goes back to ownership, cutting payroll in 2023. At the end of 2023, Twins had their first taste of playoff success in 21 years, and ownership then cut payroll by $30 million, called it a business decision, that they were right-sizing the business. I think a malaise just kind of hung over this team for, they were 70 and 53 last year, and they were thin because when Joe Ryan went down, when Correa and Buxton went down, they just ran out of gas, and they didn't add anybody at last year's deadline. So I believe they were 70 and 53 on August 17th last year. Since then, they're like 69 and 93. They went in, they were playing well again this year, and once again, they kind of found out they were thin. They were 33 and 27 on June 3rd. June 3rd or 4th, that's when Pablo Lopez got hurt. And then Bailey Ober proceeded to have the worst month of his career, gave up 14 homers in 30 innings. That's the 3rd most homers by any pitcher in Major League history in a month. And Bailey Ober, he's never been amazing. He's never been very good, but he's been very consistent, being like a 3.8 pitcher, giving you six plus innings every time. And for that month, he had 9 ERA. 30 innings, 30 runs. So you lose Pablo Lopez, you lose Bailey Ober, and all of a sudden you go from being 6 games above 500, the number 1 wildcard team, to looking at 6 teams in front of you. And it became very obvious that they were going to sell at least their free agents. And they had 6 free agents, impending free agents on that roster. So you knew they were going to trade them. When the part that it went off the rails was Carlos Correa had a conversation with Derek Falvey, the team president, the night before the deadline, and said, I love it here. I would only waive my no trade clause to one place. But Falvey essentially said, this isn't what you signed up for, this team, the direction we're going right now. And I think Correa said, okay, well, there's one place I'd go. And if you can make that happen, make that happen. Otherwise, I'm staying here. And they made it happen. And it was shocking. It was a salary dump, no question. I mean, they paid $33 million of the $102.5 left on Carlos Correa's contract. But I think once that happened, everything else kind of was like, oh boy, we're going to cash in. And mind you, they'd traded Yohan Duran on Wednesday night. Paddock was the first and Randy Dobnak. And the reason why they traded Paddock first was because he was starting on Tuesday. They wanted to get whatever team acquired him. Detroit obviously was the one that did. They wanted to not give him another start and let him go. And they did pretty well on that trade, including when you think that their motivation has been money in all of this and cleaning up the books, getting rid of Randy Dobnak, including him in the deal, probably meant a lesser prospect, but they still like the catcher that they got from the Tigers and that. But, once that everybody knew that trade was happening. Duran, I think everyone suspected that one of Jax or Duran was going to go. You look at it as a chance to cash in, because we know how rentals work, right? Rentals, you get a little bit, but you're not going to get anything overwhelming unless your rental is you're trading peak Roger Clemens 2 months before the deadline, right? Or peak Justin Verlander. Maybe your rental return then is good. But for most rentals, you're getting a minimal return. So I think everyone sort of expected maybe one of Jax or Duran goes, and then they trade Duran, and it was like, oh, this is really happening. This is going to be a pretty significant deadline. And then, they get 2 top 100 prospects, or Mick Abel is not still in that top 100, but he's very close. And they got 2 players they really like for Duran. But once that happened, it was, you think it's going to be a busy time. And then that blew away everyone's expectations on Thursday. Thursday was just insane. Griffin Jax sees Correa get traded, and Griffin Jax says, if you can find a way for me to get on another team, I'd love that too. And he has no power as an ARB guy, but the Twins were able to trade him for Taj Bradley with Tampa. They really are excited about Taj Bradley, and then they kept going. And it was like, all right, Harrison Bader, he was first. They got rid of, I think we went into the 4:00 hour, and it was 5:00 for you guys. We went into the 4:00 hour, and they had still Willie Castro, and they still had Danny Coulomb. So those are 2 of the free agents. You knew they were going to be traded, and Jax was on the roster. And it was like, okay, so probably 2 of these guys are going. And then all 3 of them went. Jax went at the last minute, but Louis Varland on top of that. And Louis Varland's at 1 year of service time. So a long time, not even at ARB money yet. And everybody kind of thought he can be a closer in the new form bullpen. And they traded him. And that came at 8 minutes before the deadline. And that one blew away. Twins fans are very angry about that one. They just don't get it. It's a hard one to explain, because you knew you had a future closer, but they love Kendry Rojas, the left-hander they got in the deal. They also got Alan Roden, who did not show a ton with the Twins in his first 12 games, and he just got put on the IL for the rest of the season with a sprained thumb. But they really like him too. So it's weird. They made all these trades. Most teams were off that day. I don't know were the Tigers off on the Thursday?
Yeah, Tigers had an off day.
Okay, so the Twins were in Cleveland in their hotel rooms, and 12 of the guys got together, and they're watching each other get picked off one by one. There was one point at 4:35 where Fox Sports sent a bad tweet saying Joe Ryan had been traded to the Red Sox. And Joe Ryan is sitting next to Griffin Jax and Louis Varland. And so Joe Ryan, they pulled that tweet real quick, but Joe Ryan for the next 25 minutes thought, I'm being traded. Meanwhile, Griffin Jax, who's asked for a trade and desperately wanted out of town, thinks I'm not being traded. And they're sitting there going through all these emotions. And then Louis Varland gets traded. And they're like, wait, what the hell is going on? What's going on? This is crazy. And then Jax gets traded. And then Joe Ryan didn't. And Joe Ryan spent they talked to him. It was really weird. His start was on Friday, so they weren't going to talk to him about being traded or not being traded on Friday just because it was his start day. So he didn't get talked to until Saturday. And then they informed him, no, we were never going to trade you. But he made a start in between. He pitched pretty well. They pitched 6 innings and gave up 2 runs in Cleveland. But like he told us after the game, I thought I'd been traded and I was thinking I was going to be traded. And I was just dealing with all the emotions of that for, 24 hours. It was just wild. It's hard to kind of capture because there's so many parts and it's not like it all is linear because again, we knew Chris Paddock was getting traded. We knew Willie Castro, Danny Coulombe, Harrison Bader. I know there's another free agent that I'm missing, but it was just crazy because there's 6 guys that we thought they were going to trade and all that's left on Friday is Christian Vasquez, who's sitting there going, I guess there's a reason why I'm here. I'm not sure what it is, but it was so surreal. And, it was funny because when I talked to scouts and GMs around the game, I didn't get anybody going, wow, the Twins really botched that. I think people were just surprised at how they did it. They got a lot of talent back for the guys, the Duran, the Jaxes, the Louis Varlands. They did well. They didn't kill themselves on value. How these guys turn out, we'll see. But a lot of the pitchers are already at the AAA level. Mick Abel, Kendry Rojas, and Taj Bradley are all at AAA right now. Oh, the other free agent the other non-free agent they traded was Brock Stewart. They got James Allman, who you guys saw over the weekend debut. So it was a long 4 days that felt like 2 months. And, there were so many things that went on during that everybody in the clubhouse was just kind of like walking on eggshells because it doesn't even Tuesday night. That's when Boston's television picked up Duran arriving in the bullpen and hugging everybody and thinking that he had been traded. And, there was the Wednesday blow up where Griffin Jacks blew up in the dugout as they're losing like 13-1 and Willie Castro awkwardly got pulled off the field. There were so many things that happened that were just weird. And I mean, you probably could write a book about it. I don't think any Twins fans would want to read that book, but it was a very, very surreal couple days.
One of the biggest names still staying with the Twins, Byron Buxton. He talked at the All-Star game about his full no-trade clause, saying that he's going to be a Twin for life. Are you surprised that Byron Buxton doesn't want out, considering everything that's going on? What's keeping him in Minneapolis?
He loves it there. That's just his home. And I think he really, I asked him after the fact, and when he said that at the All-Star break, teams had already been reaching out to his agent behind the Twins' back and saying, would you accept a no-trade clause to us if we ever decided to pursue you? And every team, and the Braves were in it. And that's home for him because he's from Georgia. The Mets were pushing hard, and obviously that's an attractive place to go. These teams had all reached out, and the agent said every time Byron is going to use his no-trade clause, so don't even pursue it. And he used his opportunity at the All-Star break to put that message out. And I asked him after the fact, I was like, hey, had teams already been reaching out to you? And he said, yes. And then I said, so was that a chance to make a message for everyone out there that you weren't going anywhere? And he said, correct. And that was it. That was the response. 6-7 teams tried. He said that where I come from, your word means everything. And he committed to the Twins and that's where he wants to be. Now, it'll be interesting after the 2026 season because his no trade clause slips to 5 teams that he can deny teams to. But I just don't think the Twins are looking to do that. I think the Twins really love what he provides. He's not a vocal guy as far as leadership. He is the energy. He is the kind of guy that everybody looks to because he plays his butt off every time. And he's had injury issues that have kept him off the field, but he works tirelessly to get back. And I think they want that example for guys. He's a fan favorite. You just have to watch one game and you see how much the fans love him. When he hits a home run, it's one of those great moments in sports at home. I get it. He really wants to make this. I think he would love to be in one place his entire career. And I think that he knows that this is a perfect spot for him. Look, if he was in New York or if he was in LA and he was injured the way he is, I think Giancarlo Stanton is a perfect example of what the treatment can be like. Stanton's great, but Stanton hears about it a lot when he's not on the field. And this is a good market for him in that regard where, everybody wants him to be on the field and he gets a lot of flack for it on social media. And it does get talked about, but it gets talked about to an extent. and then it goes away as a story. And I don't know if that story would ever go away in bigger markets. So it's a good place for him. He got paid here and he loves it. So it's kind of a combination of all things.
What's going on with the ownership situation there with the Twins? Can you walk us through that? Because I think a lot of Tigers fans have an idea that the Twins were for sale, but I don't think many of us know the details like you do. And now the Twins aren't for sale anymore. And I think like Justin Ishbia and Matt Ishbia, billionaire brothers who grew up in Michigan, they were involved at one point. I think Tigers have a good feel for the general sense of what's going on, but can you really dig into what's actually going on there with the Twins?
Yeah, if you thought the trade deadline upset Twins fans, 2 weeks ago, Twins fans were saying we sold too much. And then 4 days ago or whatever day that news came out that they didn't sell, Twins fans were saying we didn't sell enough. Like they wanted this ownership group gone. It's the Pohlad family. They've owned the team since 84. Now they're responsible for the 2 World Series titles, but also they're responsible for when the team was nearly contracted. They're responsible for the team not moving to North Carolina only because North Carolina voters declined to approve a stadium there. They are responsible for league low payrolls in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Like this family, before I ever got to covering the Twins, I'd heard the phrase cheap Pohlads, and that's what the family nickname is. And this has been going on for 30 years and fans were ready for their clean break. When they moved into the stadium in Target Field, I think the local voters paid $350 million of it. And the idea was that they would be able to field competitive rosters at that point because of the revenue. And they did for a while and they were back up. They were 9th, 10th, and 11th in payroll in 2010, 11, and 12. Then they slipped again. And, they've mostly been between 17th and 19th the last couple of years. And I mean, they still have a decent payroll or had a decent payroll going into this year. It was like $141 or $142 million. But this fan base just wants the break. They want a new ownership group. And when Justin Ishbia looked like he was going to buy it, it was like somebody that was going to come in and cared about the team. And that's what the perception is that the Pohlads don't care about the team, that they're just doing this for a profit. Well, they've run up $425 million in debt. So they're not running it really for a profit well. Obviously, going from buying it for 44 million to selling it for 1.7, there's some profit in there for sure. But this team, there's just so many issues there at that level. And they thought that Ishbia would be the guy that came in and would spend freely and just be their guy and care about the team. And then he, basically abandoned them and went to the White Sox, which everyone in the division should be very fearful of that because that the goal is that they're going to get the White Sox a new stadium. If the White Sox can get a destination stadium like the Cubs have, if they find some location in downtown and can be the Cubs of the South Side, that's going to change what that franchise is worth. And when you have an owner that cares that much, it will change what the team eventually looks like. Obviously that's a path to power still going on there where Jerry Reinsdorf holds the team at least for 5 more years. But Ishbia will come in and change that place around. And I think Twins fans were very excited about him and he spurned them and went the other way. And really they just had trouble attracting the lead investor is an anchor investor. That's what somebody basically that can own 30%, I think like 500 million or more investment. They couldn't attract very many lead anchors. They had plenty of like minority investors. The problem is you need one person to own enough to be the controlling stake partner, basically. And I think what they had was, I bet you they could have put a bunch of sales together where they had a bunch of people with $200 million, like 9 groups of $200 million probably could have figured it out and gave them a $1.8 billion offer. But then who has the voice? Who has the say? Nobody knew how that would work. And you're not allowed to legally. I know there's private equity money potentially involved. One group tried to come in with private equity being a third of their bid, and that's illegal. Major League Baseball won't allow that. I believe there's like a cap on how much a private equity firm can be involved, like maybe 10%, something along that line. I'm not sure the numbers on that, but basically it stalled out for 6 months after Ishbia, and they finally decided to sell. The offer they took is 2 minority investors who gave a significant cash infusion. We reported that it's at least 20%. I'm hearing it's more than that, but I'm still trying to get those numbers kind of tied down, but it's a significant investment which helps them pay down their debt, the $425 million in debt. But these people aren't asking for a path to power. And that's insane to me. Like, these people are maybe putting in as much as 500 million combined, and they're not asking for control. Not now, not ever. And that just doesn't happen. The people facilitating the sale said this is unique. Usually when somebody makes a sale like this, if they're going to put that much money in, they want to know they're going to control it one day. And this leaves the Pohlads in control. I think that's what is pretty much crushing the Twins fans, is that there's no change. It's the same group, and so who knows? But I asked the Pohlads, they said they're committed to this, but there's a lot of opinion out there that they took this as a way to clean up the books, pay off that debt, and make themselves profitable quicker. And that combined with, if, there's a work stoppage and there's a salary cap, will make the franchise worth so much more. And it would be very interesting to see what happens in 2 years. I just don't know how we're going to get a salary cap in baseball. There's a lot of belief that there's a lot of owners that believe that it has to happen. I don't know how that'll happen, but franchise values would go through the roof if there was a salary cap. And I think the Twins are either gambling that they can turn this around and be more profitable and be much more attractive in 2 years, or there's a salary cap in there significantly more attractive. This to me feels like they are just biding their time because there just weren't the offers right now. So who knows how it all shakes out? We still don't know who the minority partners are. It has to be approved by baseball. We don't even know all the details because at this point, it has to remain murky until ownership groups approve the new owners. But it is a mess. That we can say with certainty.
We'll see what happens with a salary cap or not a salary cap once we get to the next lockout. And that's one thing that I'll be curious to see if players even budge on that. They might say, hey, you know what? We'll sit out for a full year if we need to. We're not going to have a salary cap. I don't see the players budging on that, but we do know, right? And we do know payroll in 2026, right? Like there's not going to be a salary cap in 2026. We can guarantee that. We know that. So for the Twins, what's the expectation there? Because walk us through, like, where has payroll been and where is it headed? Because I feel like for the last 2 years, I've heard all about how the Twins are trying to cut payroll. And I've heard that kind of from the outside looking in. You're on the inside. Explain to us kind of what that has meant and then where things are going in 2026. And then who knows about a salary cap? We'll get there in 2027 and beyond.
Yeah, exactly. I look, payroll right now, with the way it's slated, I think there's like 90 million on the books, essentially, because they're so young now. They're full of 1 to 3 guys, not even arbitration eligible guys. So like when it comes to service time, it is loaded with rookies, and they have Pablo Lopez, Buxton, that's 36 million. And then Joe Ryan and Ryan Jeffers are their most expensive ARB guys. But it really only gets up if you didn't sign anybody, which obviously you can't do that because they're going to need catching help, everything like that. But you would be looking at 90 million. I think it wouldn't shock me if it was 100 to 110 million. I don't know, though. I think what they'll find out is they're going to go at it next year and try to be younger, scrappier. I think you'll see them look for players who are athletic to fill out the roster. There were so many immobile players the last couple of years. Carlos Correa's range at shortstop is terrible. Brooks Lee has maybe about a half step to a step better. That's their current shortstop. Do you want to do that? I don't know. Royce Lewis has started to show some athleticism. Luke Keeschel has it. They have some outfielders come in that have it, but they want to get more athletic. And I think that they recognize that they would like to be something like the Brewers or something like the Rays with more power hitters in the middle and give themselves multiple ways to win. I don't see that being a group that runs the payroll up to $140, $150 million. It was 157 in 2023. It was 127 last year and then 141 or 142 this year. I mean, it's possible, I guess they could go back to that, but I know that 2023, one of the groups that looked at the books and was trying to buy the team said they lost a lot of money. Last year, they lost a little money. So it's going to be interesting to see what they can kind of do going forward. Fans are going to be all out and ticket sales are probably going to plummet. Like you're going to have the people that just want to come to the ballpark to sit at the ballpark and not care about the team. That's going to be your base at this point. There's a large chunk of fans who are going to cancel their tickets. Obviously, some of those people are just threatening to do it and will come back. But it wouldn't shock me if tickets drops. It's looking like 1.8 million this year, which is going to be the low for Target Field. If that's the case, is 1.5 million on the table for next year? Possibly. Just Their fans have been boycotting, and it wouldn't shock me if they continue to further boycott. So it could get really ugly, and I think they anticipate that, and the payroll probably won't go up for that reason too much. And then they just figure, if we win, it'll cure everything. But, you need a bullpen to do that. You need pieces to a bullpen to do that. They're going to need some help there. They're going to need a lot of young guys to step up and do things. And it's going to be just strange. Like, will they trade Pablo Lopez this offseason? We'll see. Will they trade Joe Ryan this offseason? I think he'd love that. We'll see, though. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out during this offseason. It's a critical time. And there's part of me that thinks that they only got started with their roster reorganization at the deadline.
Well, you mentioned some of the players who were not traded at the deadline. And even looking back at this most recent series against the Tigers, I kind of sat back and I said, man, there are some interesting young players. I don't know that I'm all in on some of these young players, but they at least interest me. Austin Martin, Luke Keishbal, Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, Edouard Julien, and then obviously you've got the veteran Byron Buxton there. Is Luke Keishbal the real deal? Like, what do you think about some of these younger players? Is Austin Martin going to become a dude? Can Brooks Lee become a real guy? Like Royce Lewis, we've seen him go through his ups early in his career and then maybe some more downs as of late. Is he going to find it again? Edouard Julien had that great first season. Where is he at moving forward? It just seems like there are some interesting young pieces here. The question is, do they develop into legit guys? Yes or no?
Right, exactly. And I think they really love Keishbal. When you look at their roster, there are 8 guys that were first, second, or third round picks on that. There's real talent in the room. Austin Martin is getting a shot, and he always projected to like a 280, 330 on base guy and not a ton of power. That's a major leaguer. But can he get there? And he's going to get this 2 months of runway to show whether or not that's in there. And, he's a guy that can potentially be a utility guy, move all around, second base, center field, both corners in the outfield. I don't think they see him as shortstop anymore, but you've got a bunch of guys like that. Julien has just come back and he hit the lefty homer off Skubal, the first one. That's the first time we've really seen Julien's offense he had a great rookie year in 2023, and he came back and had a very good April 2024, and then he just disappeared, fell off the face of the earth, and his defense went with him. And when he was peaking, his defense was about average at best, and now it's fallen off to the point where it's well below average, and he has to hit if he's going to be not a good defender. And so they need to see there before they make a decision. But Royce Lewis is a big key to this. They need Royce Lewis to be Royce Lewis. Matt Wallner has had his moments, but Matt Wallner has had a very strange year where he's missed a lot of fastballs and done a lot less damage than he'd done in the past. So there are a bunch of guys that it's possibly there. And there's more coming because they've got Walker Jenkins at AA. Emmanuel Rodriguez is extremely interesting, but he can't seem to stay on the field. Wow, shocker with the Twins prospect, can't stay on the field. But he's been at times a top 40 prospect. Like, he's just this little unit of power, like a 5'9", 200 and something pound corner outfielder who potentially can hit 20 homers, 20 steals, and looks like a really good player. But he's been beat up, and Kalen Culpepper's coming through the ranks. And then, you look at the starting pitching. So Pablo Lopez should pitch before this year is out. Bailey Ober looked okay against the Tigers. Also, Bailey Ober got home at 4:30 in the morning, just like everybody else from New York on Thursday morning after Wednesday. He tried to fly out early. Both his early flights to get home and get a good night's sleep got canceled by weather in New York. And so Bailey Ober, the first 3 innings, looked great. And then physically he ran out of gas, and that's when the Tigers jumped all over him. So you got Bailey, you got Pablo, you got Joe Ryan, you have Mick Abel, I think Mick Abel's got 17 innings and 19 or 20 strikeouts at AAA for them. It's been a very good debut. You have Taj Bradley, you have Kendry Rojas. You feel good about your group of starters. There should be a chance to be in a lot of games, and you have depth, but what do you do with the bullpen, and who steps into those roles? Do they shift some of their younger starting prospects like David Festa to the bullpen, where maybe his slider and fastball make him an elite weapon? And you do that. That was a problem with Louis Varland. They waited and waited and waited with Louis Varland. Louis Varland should have been in the bullpen last year. Do they just say to Festa, let's do this now because you've had trouble holding up? Who knows? It's going to be interesting, but there is a lot of talent in that room still. It's just now developing that talent and making them into better major leaguers and a more formidable team. It's a big what if. But, it's not far-fetched to think they could win 80 games next year by scrapping their way to a lot of victories. And because they do have that pitching, but 80 wins get you third or fourth place in the division. And if you spend, it could be much more interesting, but who knows what this future holds for them.
And then Twins manager Rocco Baldelli, is he going to be back in 2026? And do you think he's going to be around in 2027 and beyond to see this thing through? Or do you think the Twins will find a new manager for 2027?
I think this is a real big couple of months here, or 6-7 weeks are left, whatever it is. The response from the deadline so far, I know they lost 3 or 4 of the Tigers, but they've played really competitively in most of these games. And the lack of bullpen has cost them 4 or 5 games. So you trade your bullpen away, you know what you're getting. Basically, like you've seen it, like Brooks Kriske and Thomas Hatch and all these guys that are journeymen, that's who's filling out some of these roles. And
it's bad.
Yeah, it's what happens when you trade all those guys. But I think that in June, they picked up Rocco's option and for next year. And he had sort of been lame duck, but they said he wasn't lame duck. But in June, they picked it up and they were in the middle of a 1-11 stretch at the time. And fans went nuts when they found out. And realistically, they had actually done it earlier when they were closer to 500 because they had to wait on paperwork, something like that. But they didn't say anything. And fans were upset because I found out and reported it when they were in the middle of their 1-11 stretch. And basically at that point, it looked like, could he actually get fired? Because they were 1-11. They're going through their second really big rut, but they kind of figure out a way to stay just below 500 after that. And I think he's safe. This was the non-ownership news was good for Derek Falvey, who's the president, and Derek Falvey loves Rocco Baldelli. So that means it's good for him. It keeps things stable. If there had been a new owner coming in, maybe they would have made a managerial change. That's, new owners love to do that kind of thing. That's what they do. They put their stamp on it in some way. But I think if this team doesn't fall on its face the last 6 weeks, that Rocco stays.
All right, Dan, thank you for all the insight into what's going on with the Twins, from the fire sale at the trade deadline to the ownership situation to everything in between. And thank you for joining the Days of Roar podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Evan.
Everyone, that was Dan Hayes, the Minnesota Twins beat writer for The Athletic. We have more to discuss this week about the Tigers, including an early look at some of the September call-up options. But before we dig in, let's take a break. All right, we're back. Thanks as always to Dan Hayes. I really appreciated having him on. But now let's get into some more prospect talk. If the Tigers aren't going to promote Kevin McGonigle, then Chris Brown, you tell me, who are some of the players from the minor leagues who could be candidates to help the Tigers down the stretch?
Yeah, it's different than last year where it seemed like they had a whole bunch of different guys down the stretch that they could call on to bring up. This year, there were only a few interesting names, although fans, every time we post a highlight, fans are like, call him up. And one of those they always talk about is Hao-Yu Lee. And Max Anderson kind of fits into the same category. Max Anderson just got promoted to AAA Toledo. He's hit the ground running pretty well. But both of those guys are kind of superfluous to the current roster. Hao-Yu Lee in particular has really done a good job against left-handed pitching in AAA, but he's basically gotten owned by right-handed pitching. It's like a 600 OPS or maybe even lower. And so if you bring him up to be a lefty masher, well, he's basically Andy Ibanez, maybe with a little bit more speed, but it doesn't seem terribly necessary. So in that case, as we mentioned with McGonigle, it's probably better for Lee and for Anderson for that matter to just keep playing every day and getting the reps in AAA. From the pitcher side, there is, you mentioned earlier, Drew Sommers, who is really fascinating to me. He's a big, hefty lefty. It's kind of a Brant Herter profile, right? It's the fastball. He throws a little bit harder than Herter does. It's still 93, 94, but he'll get up to 96. And it's a sinker slider, but he's got a ton of extension. It's like 7+ feet of extension, which the Tigers seem to really like. He's going to make the fastball play up a little bit. And when he got to the Tigers from the Rays and the Mason Englert deal, he didn't have much of a changeup, and they're having him throw the changeup more. It's still kind of his distant third or fourth pitch if you want to break the fastballs into two, but he hasn't given up a hit on the changeup yet. He's thrown like 60 of them. So it's working pretty well for him. So yeah, but he's a really interesting guy. He threw nothing but strikes in AA Erie, and in AAA, it's been a little bit tougher for him. But we've seen that a bunch over the last couple of years where guys go up to AAA and their numbers are super ugly. Then they come to the big leagues and they're like, oh, they can actually pitch. So I don't know if it's one of those cases or if AAA hitters are just a little bit more patient against him, but he seems like a guy who would be very interesting. And then I do think we probably will see him. He needs to be added to the 40-man to be protected from Rule 5 at the end of the year anyway. So why not now? A couple other pitchers. Tyler Madison already is on the 40-man roster, and he's coming back from Tommy John surgery. He's a really interesting guy. He never threw a ton of strikes. Like, it's not completely wild, but he's never been a control artist. But he's got, if the Tigers want a completely different look, he provides it. He's straight over the top with his fastballs. I've seen it up to 98 before he got injured. It's more 93, 95 now, but it's got truly elite characteristics. It's like spin rate is 2,600 plus RPMs, and it's got 19 inches of induced vertical break on average. It has a ton of hop and ride. He also has a slider and a curve, or a changeup, I should say, that flashes above average pitches, but they're not consistent enough, and the strikes aren't consistent enough. So I'd be kind of shocked if they call him up. But it is a fun arm. You touched on, there's Matt Seelinger is kind of a fun story. Now, he pitched for Erie last year. He's 30. I didn't think much of it last year when I saw him in Erie. And the first thing I saw of him this year was him giving up an absolute tank in kind of bootleg backfield footage to Kevin McGonigle. I'm like, all right, well, that's not great. It turns out that that's more about Kevin McGonigle than Matt Seelinger. He's been really good. And it's like a low 90s fastball, but it's got some pretty good characteristics too. And he's got a solid cutter that he uses to help get out lefties. But his signature pitch is a knuckle curve, but it's actually like a knuckle curve, if that makes any sense. Like most pitchers, like Jack Flaherty, right? They use a knuckle curve, and it's to get more spin. Seelinger actually kills spin with his knuckle curve. It's like a knuckleball, and it's got a really funky look to it. And it's got low spin, and it drops 4 feet, and it's been a weapon for him. So that's another interesting arm. I don't know if they'd call on him or if he's just kind of an OR guy. And then the two other names, they're kind of dark horses here is, RJ Pettit is another reliever, a big guy who he's like 6'8", 300 pounds. And he's always thrown pretty hard, mid 90s. He'll get up to 98 when he's really amped up. But they have him in AAA. They just called him up to AAA a couple weeks ago. They have him throwing mostly sliders. They're turning him into kind of like a slider monster, which I think is a term that AJ Hinch likes. And I don't know if that's something that they plan to, deploy in the big leagues with him, but he's a name who could randomly call up. And the one other name, and this is kind of a shout out to my partner Rogelio, who's been not necessarily boosting this guy, but saying like, don't forget about him, is Trey Cruz. Trey Cruz is 27 now. He was, I think, third rounder in the 2020 draft when they took Torkelson and Dingler and Cole Keith. And I've never thought that he's going to be a great hitter. Like, his pure hitting ability isn't spectacular, but he does a lot of things well and a lot of things right. He's a switch hitter. He walks a ton. He's got some speed. He's got some pop, and he can play everywhere in legitimate solid defense at shortstop and center field. So if you want another like jack of all trades guy on the roster, he could be a name you might see. But like I said, I'm skeptical there, but he's just somebody to keep in the back of your mind.
Those are some really good names. Matt Seelinger, by the way, I think he calls it a knuckle puck is what he calls that pitch. And it's pretty spectacular. So when you do talk about different looks, that's a different look.
Yeah. And if people want to learn more about that, our contributor, Colin Arthur, actually went down and interviewed him and there's a video on our YouTube page, TigersMLReport.com on, YouTube. But yeah, they have options. We talked about it before. There are tons and tons of relief options, and they have more in the minors. It's just about what they're looking for and what specifically they like.
All right, let's get into Troy Melton. He's been absolutely outstanding. Whether you start him, whether you put him in the bullpen, he's been great. And you've gotten to see a lot of him over the years as he's risen for the farm system, now gotten to the big leagues. And he's one of the guys that you can really count on right now in this bullpen, and that's saying something. What is the upside for Troy Melton? Big picture, long term, like what can this guy actually be? Because when I look at him, I say number 3 starter, maybe even more. I love the upside in the bullpen right now. I think the stuff plays up. I really, really hope that the Tigers do not banish him to the bullpen forever. Like I've said this before, that I've always thought that Brant Herter can be more than a reliever. I think Brant Herter can be a starter. I think Brant Herter, though, now has been pushed into this reliever role. And I don't really know what the avenue is for him to get back to the rotation. And I hope the same thing doesn't happen with Troy Melton, because I do think that the upside is pretty high as a starter. But Chris, you've seen him all along the way. Where did this guy come from? And then what can he be? Yeah,
it's been fun watching him. We saw him his first outing in West Michigan a couple of years ago, and he was, throwing really hard early on and then lost all semblance of command. You watch this experience as these guys get better. I tend to agree with you. I would be saddened, bummed out, however you want to say it, if he got moved to the bullpen. I don't think he will. I think they're just kind of watching his innings. And because there's so much there that you want out of your starters, right? He's a big, strong kid. He's got 6 pitches. He throws a lot of strikes. He throws very hard. He's got tons of extension that one of the things that's really nice is he misses bats with his fastball.
Yes, he misses bats with the fastball, which Jackson Jobe doesn't do, by the way. Like Jackson Jobe, when he was healthy, of course, didn't do that. And I've always been pounding the table. Like that is the number one indicator of a guy who can thrive at the big leagues is does that fastball miss bats in the zone? And for Troy Melton, it does.
Yeah, and it always has. He struggled last year in Erie against left-handed batters, and he's worked on his slider. It's harder now. He added a sinker. He's got a cutter. He's got a curve. He's done a lot to kind of counteract that trouble with lefties. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think with fairly minimal changes right now, I think who he is right now, he could be a solid number 4 starter with just some solid pitch sequencing from the catching. I think the upside, like you said, is probably a good number 3, if not better. And part of that will be determined by, does he find a consistent third pitch that can get him swings and misses, or, that he uses more often than what he's doing right now? Or is he just kind of a kitchen sink guy still, and that the fastball slider are his main pitches, and then he peppers in the other offerings? But if he finds that third above average to plus pitch, then yeah, number 3 starter, number 2, depending on, the development. And we see some guys develop in the big leagues. We always talk about Tarik Skubal. He's a completely different pitcher than he was when he came out of the minors. He's got a devastating changeup now, which he barely threw at all. So there's room to grow there, and Melton has all the physical tools you want.
All right, last thing before we get out of here, center fielder Parker Meadows is expected to begin a rehab assignment as soon as Tuesday with AAA Toledo, coming back from a right quad strain. Question is, what is the roster move when he gets healthy? I think it's fairly obvious. Trey Sweeney will likely be optioned. Javier Baez will then move from center field to play more shortstop, and Parker Meadows roams center field. But more importantly than the roster move, how about the impact of Parker Meadows? What could that mean for this team down the stretch? Because when the Tigers did not add a bat at the trade deadline, part of that was betting on Zach McKinstry to keep doing what he's doing. And Zach McKinstry has since fallen off. Another part of that was counting on either A, Matt Vierling, or B, Parker Meadows to step up the rest of the year and really bring it. Matt Vierling is now injured. So you look at their reasons for not adding a bat, it was in Zach McKinstry we trust, and let's count on one of Matt Vierling or Parker Meadows really stepping up for this offense. And so far, they're 0 for 2, and their last chance here is Parker Meadows to really bring it coming back off this rehab assignment. And we've seen the impact. We know what he can do. I mean, everybody saw him come back from his stint in AAA last year when he made the swing change. Obviously, remember, Tigers sent him down, goes to Toledo, makes a swing change, comes back up, and he hit like 300 the rest of the way. He was huge for the Tigers in the postseason. He was outstanding defensively in center field. What are your thoughts on what this impact could be? But then also too, like, how important is Parker Meadows to the Tigers doing what they want to do, getting that bye to the ALDS, making a deeper run than they did last year in the postseason? Is Parker Meadows still that X factor that we thought of him as coming into the season? I
certainly think he could be. He's the most electric player on the roster when he's healthy and going. He hit that home run against the Astros in the playoffs last year too. People might not necessarily remember that because of the heroics later, but yeah, when he's right, he's a 5-tool player. Now, he wasn't right this year when we saw him, and that was, you start to worry a little bit because he wasn't right at the first part of the 2024 season. But he was the catalyst. He was the guy who was making all the highlight plays, walk-off hits, walk-out grand slam, home run robin catches. He's got that level of physical ability and talent. And what you hope is that he can come in and they can ease him in a little bit, and he comes back and they put him at the bottom of the lineup. But if he can get going by the end of September, then yeah, I think you can use him as your leadoff man in a playoff series against a right-handed pitcher. And one of the other fun things that has happened this year is, he's such a great center fielder. And he actually, it seemed like it was down a little bit when he was playing, and for reasons that are kind of hard to fathom. But at the same time, his absence has allowed the Tigers to realize that Javi Baez is a pretty damn good center fielder too. So they could play mix and match there now some more. They don't have to keep Parker Meadows in against a tough lefty if they don't want to, because they have Javi who can go and play center. So, I think it's potentially a very large impact on the team, but I also think it's just another piece that can help them win.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, maybe call Kevin McGonigle up to play shortstop and then just platoon Javi Baez and Parker Meadows in center field. I'm all on board. All right, it's time to get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. Thanks to everyone out there for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating and comment what you think about the show. Stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to say thank you to the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, sports editor Bill Bradley, and our magical producer, the man himself, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.